So welcome everyone. Welcome to eedina, a People's Media House. Today we have a privilege of having Kunal Purohit with us. He's a distinguished journalist, but he's also a documentary maker. He's a podcaster. Over the years, he has had many awards on his name. One of them being Ramnath Goenka's award, and that was for civic journalism. His award from Statesman was on rural reporting. Then he has an award on gender-sensitive issues. So there are many areas in which he's dabbled, but in the recent past, he has been working on hate crimes and the politics of hate crimes. And not just that, in the recent past, not just the politics of hate crime, he's been looking at the cultural background behind the hate crimes. And that's how the new book, which he has come out with, is called H-Pop or Hindu Pop, The Secretive World of Hindutva Pop Stars. That's the book which we are going to talk about. Before we go and discuss the book, I just wanted to reflect about something which, from my college days. During the university, in Delhi University, I had to travel from Shaibabad in Uttar Pradesh to Tilak Bridge in Delhi. And while traveling, I used to listen to these very tacky Bollywood bhajans. And they used to run on, and people used to sing them. I sometimes felt that maybe the Bhakti movement, the Tulsidas and Surdas, needed this kind of Bollywood tacky music to be translated and for people to absorb it. So I kept saying that this is the new form of Bhakti movement, and T-Series and Jhankar Beats is supporting it. So when I read the book and when I see the sort of music which is coming out of this, maybe a new aesthetics is being developed, maybe a new background of music is being developed, but it's slightly different. There is no love for God. There's a lot more hatred. There's hatred towards a community. There's a political agenda. There is wanting to twist the facts. This is a part of a new politics, and there is aesthetics also involved in it. So what better than have Kunal around with us to help us understand the politics behind it, the narrative behind it, where it started, and is there any hope for us? So without any delay, first I would like to welcome you again. Thank you for coming to eedina Studios.
Thank you for having me, Venkat. It's a pleasure to be here.
The first thing I wanted to do before going into your own journalist world is to give, how did this idea come out? What was the inspiration? If you can give an example so that people know exactly what we are going to talk about, and from there on we will take it forward.
As you mentioned, I have been traveling across the country in different parts of the country, trying to understand why hate crimes were happening, and we've seen a wave of hate crimes over the last 7-8 years or so, especially mob violence, especially lynchings, communal riots as well. And while I traveled across the country, the question sort of kept nagging me. Why were people who've known each other, people who've been friends and neighbors for their entire lives, suddenly turning against each other just because they belong to different religions? This difference did not exist till a few years ago, or at least did not proactively exist in their sort of conscious realms. But suddenly it had started existing, and then people were, starting to hate each other. People were starting to differentiate against each other on the basis of their religion. And while I was trying to understand the reasons behind this, is when I really stumbled upon the world of what I call Hindutva pop, which is Hindutva pop culture through music, through poetry, and through written books. It's this constant attempt to try and stoke and try and popularize Hindutva across the country, but especially in the Hindi-speaking belts, because that is where the book is really situated. It's situated in 7 different states of India, most of them, primary speakers of Hindi language. And when I was traveling to a small town in Jharkhand called Gumla, I saw how there was a near riot that was, that almost erupted because a Ram Navami procession, which was passing through a mosque, decided to play this one song whose lyrics were extremely provocative and targeted towards Muslims and targeted towards Islam. And then that song almost triggered a riot in that small town of Jharkhand. While the riot was prevented because the police swung into action, stopped the music, that same night, there was a Muslim boy who was lynched by some of the people who were in that very procession, which could have triggered a riot. And sort of that made me wonder, what are all of these songs? Who's making these songs? Who are the consumers of this kind of music? And that is when I started to dive deep into the world of Hindutva pop. And 4 years later, the result is this book.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Before we go into the book, it may be good to know where you come from, in the sense that what is your background? And I see that this book is from a journalist. What sort of decisions you have to make during the book?
So I've been a journalist for close to 17, 18 years now, Venkat, and I've always been based out of Mumbai, which is where I still call home. I've done all kinds of reporting. I mean, as you mentioned, I've done reporting on politics. I've reported on the government in Maharashtra, in Mumbai. I've reported on civic and urban development issues. But I've also been traveling a lot to the rural parts of India. Much of my reporting was in Maharashtra because that is where I hail from. But then I've also increasingly over the last few years been traveling to places like Uttar Pradesh, places like Jharkhand. Both of these places had very high numbers of hate crimes. In fact, when I traveled to UP was, because UP was recording the most number of hate crimes in the country. And Jharkhand was number 2. So I decided to go to both of these places. That has largely been, sort of my repertoire of work when it comes to journalism.
Yeah, and when a journalist writes a book, how does it differ in terms of a research, and what does one have to keep in mind? That's something.
So typically, journalists are rather infamous for this. Is that they shoot and scoot, which is that they sort of follow an issue for a few days and then they forget and then they go to the other issue. A book doesn't allow you the liberty to do that. It sort of holds you, it binds you to the subject, and then it ensures that you have to continuously build on what you've done. So your access is very, very crucial, because for 4 years, for instance, in this book, I have followed the lives of these 3 characters, right? One is a Hindutva singer, so she sings only Hindutva music. One is a Hindutva poet who only recites Hindutva-oriented poetry. And the third one is a book publisher who publishes books which sort of, speak to the core tenets of Hindutva. And for all of these 3 people, the idea was to continuously go back to them, to try and sort of, look at very, very closely what their worlds were like. What is their work like? What are their everyday routines like? How do the songs come to them? How does the poetry come to them? Is it really an organic process? Is it driven by commerce? All of these questions are rather tricky because, subjects like these would not be very accessible if you just go and meet them maybe once or twice. I think it requires a level of comfort where they should feel that comfort with you to be able to then open up and tell you so many of these stories. So that is where the process also differs, because, being in touch with these people for 4 years, constantly going back to them, trying to track their lives over this period. And a lot of my book also deals with their personal ups and downs, because I firmly believe the personal is also the political, right? It can't be very, very separate from each other. So much of their politics also comes from their early lives, comes from, traumas in some ways of their early lives, where, they've had experiences which sort of veered them towards the right-wing ideology. So for me, it was also important to know them deeply, to be able to connect with them at a human level, and to be able to understand and then tell their stories.
Yeah, that takes me to a place that before we come into the politics of it, maybe if you can take through those 3 people whom you chose. Was it easy to find? Did you drop anybody in between? How did you stitch that story? Because they seem to be slightly different, but they seem to be under some same umbrella. Would you share with us how you went about these 3, how they're different? And then we'll take maybe the politics after that.
Absolutely. So it wasn't easy to finalize and to, sort of then get them to agree, because as you asked, there were people who I did want to approach, who sort of decided that they didn't want to be a part of this. I think there is a high level of cynicism around, especially the English media, in some of these circles, because the English media doesn't really engage too much in a very deep manner with so many of these, these sort of ecosystem characters. So there is that high level of discomfort as well, and skepticism as to just what it is that you're trying to achieve when you want to speak to us. So I had to really sort of be very careful in scrutinizing their sort of work, their lives, and then be able to finalize on them. The reason for me to finalize on these 3 particular guys, and there are multiple people who are doing very similar work, to appeal to me about all of the 3, is the fact that they're all engaged in not just building up their online, sort of repertoire of work, but they're actively, sort of doing things offline. I think we sometimes often mistake the Hindu right-wing ecosystem to be an online creation only. We don't see the offline the narratives that they're sort of trying to work on, the activities that they do. My question used to always be, I said, okay, if people are doing all of this online, how are they reaching out to people who are not on any of these platforms, right? What about the people who are not so well versed with with a Facebook, with a YouTube, with a WhatsApp? Some of the answers come from these characters that I've focused on, because, for instance, the singer Kavi Singh, she would travel quite a bit and sort of do concerts, do shows, especially before COVID. She would do a number of these shows in different parts of the country, but especially in northern India. Similar is the case with Kamal Agni, who is the poet, who's the Hindutva poet. Now, Kamal is constantly crisscrossing the country. He's constantly going from one state to another, from one town to another, from one city to another. And he's reaching out to newer and newer audiences. Not necessarily audiences who are well versed with the phone or well versed with the internet. But these are all people in smaller towns, especially, who come to listen to him, who enjoy his poetry, and then maybe patronize him some more online. So similar is the case with Sandeep Dev, who is the publisher. He's built an incredible network of distribution of books. He runs this publishing house from Delhi, but he ships his books everywhere. They go to different parts of the country, but they also go outside of India. And this is the stuff that I was interested in. How are these offline worlds also operating? So I sort of carefully looked at different characters and then narrowed down on these three people, because they were doing things not just in the digital, not just in the online world, but also very actively in the offline world.
In some sense, are they really entrepreneurial in nature? Are they?
I would say so, yes, because I think there is a high level of individualization there. They're not backed by solid teams. I mean, they're in sort of the business parlance, they're really startups in some ways, right? They've decided to stick to a certain kind of business, which is the business of creating art in the name of Hindutva, and are constantly looking to scale up. Right? That's a term that we often use in the startup world. They're often looking to scale up. They're often looking to build sustainable models of business. They're constantly seeing the ways in which commerce can intersect with their work, with their ideology. So they're highly, highly entrepreneurial, because I think they've realized this more than most of us, is that the way to keep doing this is to make it financially lucrative, not just sustainable, mind you, but financially lucrative. That will ensure that they're able to continuously do this. And that will also ensure, on the other hand, that the production value of a lot of this stuff gets better and better. Right? So if you see Kavi Singh's videos from say about 4 years ago to now, you will see a drastic difference in the production value of her videos. They're much more slick, they're much more well shot, they're much more vibrant in the colors. The locations are very interesting. I mean, there used to be videos where she would just stand in front of a green screen in a studio and record some of her songs. But now she's traveling. I mean, now she's going to different parts of the country. She's going to the Ganga. She's shooting on the banks of the Ganga River. So she's doing this. And all of this is possible only when you're able to scale up, and only when you're able to actually find a business model that works and that allows you to constantly invest that money into growing your art.
There is a lot of commercial viability. They are also working on the aesthetics. Maybe we'll come to that, and that's an important part. Also wanted to slightly abstract and understand, is this all pervasive? Has it reached every place, the scale of it? I remember that nowadays we're talking about what Ramayana serial did to us, but during the same time, or about the same time, we had Nukkad, but I think we have forgotten it. Ramayana seems to have had an impact, and I now see what it did to us. I wanted to get your perspective about how pervasive it is. Is it a now phenomenon or an in-depth phenomenon, or is it really becoming a bhakti movement of some form? Is your opinion how it's spreading itself, and how strong is its roots?
What's fascinating, Venkat, is when I first started reporting on this book, which was in 2019, I would see especially the music part of it the Hindutva music that I talk about, I would see it much more prevalent in towns, smaller towns, and maybe say villages of the north of India. And that is where you would see the kind of Ramnavami processions that I spoke about. You would see the Kawad Yatra, for instance. You would see all of these events playing some of this music, and that is where this music used to be extremely popular. But as I sort of made this 4-year journey to writing this book, even the Hindutva music has really made its own journey, because it's now in cities. Now it's in the metros of India. And I'll give you a small example. I mean, we saw the recent Cricket World Cup and India and Pakistan playing each other at the Narendra Modi Stadium. And some of the music that was played was firmly Hindutva music. Bharat ka bacha bacha Jai Shri Ram bolega. That was a song that was captured in a lot of the videos that came out of the stadium as being played in the stadium. Similarly, in Mumbai, where I stay, the Ganpati processions used to never be a communal affair. I mean, they used to always be a syncretic affair where different religions would come together and celebrate it. It still remains that for the most part, and I don't want to sound alarmist, but in this year's Ganpati processions, especially when when people were immersing idols, the immersion parties used to have loud music, which was again Hindutva music. Similar is the case with Navratri celebrations in Mumbai, because in Mumbai we have these massive Navratri celebrations on public grounds where very famous singers and sort of artists come and perform, and people pay hefty ticket prices to get in and dance to the tunes of those songs. And in some of those, I found Hindutva music being performed. So, from it being a phenomena which was firmly in the semi-rural and the rural, it has now traveled all the way to cities like Mumbai, like Ahmedabad, and it's now being played and sort of popularly received by people in these cities as well. So to quickly just answer your question, I don't know if it's all pervasive yet, but I know that it is definitely increasing its areas of influence.
Hindutva pop, we think a lot of it is growing through individuals or entrepreneurial. We're also seeing it spread. Would like you to help us understand what is the ideology and the politics of it, and what is the narrative it's building. Maybe all the three are the same, but would like you to dissect and bring that all together for us.
I think some of the common strands that I found in Hindutva music, in Hindutva poetry, as well as in books, is that it very closely aligns itself with the ideals of the RSS and the BJP. In the sort of very distinctly marking, quote unquote, the enemies of Hindus, right? And you can go back all the way to Golwalkar, you can go back to Savarkar, who've clearly looked at Christians and Muslims as some of the biggest threats that Hindus face. And that is a constant reiteration that I find in this pop culture as well. All of the three formats constantly reiterate the fact that Hindus are in danger from these two groups and from these two religions. So that is a constant strand and a continuous strand, in all of the three formats. But there's also something very interesting that happens, and that is that it aligns also very closely with the BJP's agenda often. I find that each time the BJP faces dissent or it faces criticism from people, from groups, from parties, these different popular culture formats are activated and are mobilized to sort of attack and to launch scathing criticisms of those people who are criticizing the BJP. And I'll give you an example. The CAA protests that happened across the country in opposition to the act, they were a constant feature in a lot of this pop culture where artists would make songs, artists would write poems, they would write books about how these protests were motivated and about how these protests were basically being carried out by enemies of the Hindus. These were people who didn't want Hindus to be safe, and hence they were doing this. Similarly is the case with, if you remember a few years ago in the first term of the Modi government, when a lot of artists and writers decided to return their awards. A lot of this pop culture referencing in these words, it continues to disparagingly refer to these artists and writers and creative artists as the award Wapsi gang. Similarly, students from JNU, students from Jamia Millia, all of these guys are constantly also still referred to as the Tukde Tukde gang. And you will find reiterations of these enemies in this pop culture as well. So the politics and the ideology does revolve very, very closely with what the Hindu right wing, especially the RSS and the BJP, believe are its enemies and are the targets of its ire. But it also sometimes goes beyond it, right? I mean, it speaks a language which even the RSS and the BJP officially do not want to be engaged in. Because they sometimes don't, I mean, they would not want to be engaged in that kind of hate speech. But some of these pop stars are at a liberty to do that. They're at a liberty to really raise the sentiment. They're at a liberty to raise their rhetoric against so many of these players. And that is what I find fascinating, that they're not just echoing what the BJP and the RSS and the Hindu right wing are doing, but they're going a step further. And sort of they're stoking up hate, fear and anger against Muslims, Christians and a few other groups in ways that even the BJP and the RSS might be shy of.
Okay, so it's becoming slightly larger than what their stuff is. Maybe we are even creating a Frankenstein here. It would be nice to get a few examples from you. One you said is the ideology itself. They're saying the outsider Muslim, but they also tackle temporary political goals, which needs to be tackled maybe before an election, etc. Can you give a couple of examples of that? What it does help them to build this kind of narrative for maybe RSS and for BJP? How do they do maybe with
I'll give you a fascinating example, Venkat. This was UP elections in 2022, when Yogi Adityanath was fighting to be re-elected. And I had been following the elections very, very closely and I was trying to understand which way things will swing. But having followed that, when I went to UP, and this was just before the election, the first phase of the election had just gotten over and I was in UP then. I found in UP something very, very interesting, which I didn't, see any signs of outside of UP. And that was, wherever I would go, I would listen to caller tunes or ringtones of this one particular song. The song went, "Jo Ram ko laaye hain, hum unko laayenge. UP mein fir bhagwa lehrayenge." So it really tells you, that those who got Ram back to UP, which I mean is through maybe the Ram Mandir, are people who we will now elect back, right? And then one would think that this is a bit of a propaganda video and, a propaganda audio, and it may not really sort of resonate too widely. But in my experience, Venkat, I would go and I would travel to places. I would hear it in cars. I would hear it on people's mobile phones. People were listening to it. People were making reels about it. Some of the top BJP leaders would visit and, the locals would play this song to welcome them. And this is the kind of stuff that you don't see outside of these spaces. You don't see, I don't think there was any reporting about this particular song and the impact that it was creating. So this is the example of how sometimes even the more immediate political goals are being met by Hindutva music, right? And the song was so successful that after Yogi Adityanath got re-elected, they rewarded, in fact, the singer of this song. And I mention all of this in the book as well, because I interact with the singer and I speak to him about it. So they reward this singer for his services, and they give him an award as well. So you're seeing the confluence of politics and art very, very closely, even in the immediate space, not just in long-term political goals.
So before we move into this media content and how even a caller tune can be used as art and influence, where is the commercial side of this process? You did say they're entrepreneurs. The other is a lot of time the imagination of people sitting outside this is that when we say orchestrated, some people would imagine it's orchestrated, but it's thought maybe like a Mogambo's room, somebody is telling do this, that. Where is that orchestration if it's happening? Is it even orchestrated? And what is the commercial viability of this? If you could take
I think it's very interesting to see those networks in play, Venkat, because seemingly they're all, organically growing artists, right? Seemingly they don't have a BJP card. They don't have a card that says that they belong to the Hindu right-wing organizations, nor to the RSS, nor to the VHP. But I think what I see is that once the Hindu right-wing ecosystem sees some of their work, and once it sees the kind of impact that it can possibly create, it's very quick to co-opt it in different ways.
Okay.
And by co-opting, I don't necessarily mean money, right? I don't mean monetarily. I don't mean that they always go and fund them. But what I do mean is that, then they're often given platforms through which these artists, they grow their influence. They get even more popular. They sort of, reach wider and wider audiences. So there is that happens. Sometimes the co-option can also be for campaigns. And we spoke about election campaigns. And I mentioned in my book how one of the characters in the book is approached by the Hindu right wing just before the UP elections to create art and to create poetry, which helps sway the sentiments of Hindu voters in a certain part of UP. And how he does it rather successfully. I mean, his video that he writes, and the video is, again, I mean, I don't want to get into too much because I want people to read and understand for themselves. But the video is really the creation of Hindu right-wing thought about this one historical character. He writes the poetry is uploaded, they make videos, the Hindu right-wing makes videos out of it. And then that video is retweeted or it's shared on social media platforms by the likes of Kangana Ranaut, right? So how does the poetry reach from this artist to Kangana? What are the links? What is the bridge between the two? And this is where the networks come into play, right? So while some of it might be organic, some of it is orchestrated in the way for it to be able to reach wider audiences and for it to be able to create the impact that the establishment wants it to create.
Yeah. We do say in community or in viral growth, you need a particular number after which it can become itself grow. So there is some orchestration, but there is some amount of, once it grows, then those networks feed into each other because it's beneficial for both, right? So the other question would be, where is the financial viability of this model? Do they consciously think about it? You did mention they are entrepreneurs. How does it all work?
They've got multiple models at work, Venkat. I mean, one model is, of course, that they all, as I said, they all have a very active online persona, by which I mean that they have their own YouTube channels. Many of them have millions of followers on those YouTube channels. So, which basically means that their social media is monetized, right? They earn very decent money, sometimes running in the lakhs every month from these social media platforms. So that becomes a very viable way of operating and running their business. But then there's also the offline part, which is, for instance, in Kamal's case, he's traveling a lot to do these poetry recital sessions, and that's where he also earns his money from, right? And the interesting part is that the online and the offline feed into each other so well. If he becomes big online, that means that his demand for the offline grows, because then more and more organizers want him to be performing there. And if he gets, if he performs a lot offline, he sees that people are then getting added to his online follower base. So they're constantly feeding into each other, and they're constantly making the other more viable, right? When he does more shows, he gets more followers online. So he gets more followers and then he gets more shows. So it's this constant cycle that they're all sort of trying to jump on. And they realize that social media following counts for a lot. So they very actively work on ensuring that their social media following is often into the millions. And it's constantly, being mobilized and galvanized, not just by putting up their art, which is their songs, their music, or their poetry, but also by putting out their views. So what they often do is every time there is a contentious issue that is taking place, they will come online, they will release videos which are not music or poetry, which is just basically them delivering a speech or giving their opinion on a certain thing. But of course, their opinion is highly sort of hardline Hindutva in most cases, right? So they also try and use the follower base to galvanize the followers, to make them known that they are hardcore supporters of the Hindutva ideology. And then that ensures that there are more people coming their way.
And it seems like they're very comfortable moving from one media to another media to content. I wanted to know your view as a journalist. we've see changes in how we consume content. There is a content, there is formats of how the content come, there is social media, there's online, offline. We are still struggling to come to know what should target whom. Should we go in Instagram? Should we go in WhatsApp? Which one works on Discord channels for gaming or something like that? They seem to be very comfortable once they know the target audience, and they seem to be happy to move from one to the other. I would like to know your view about how they do it, and then also reflect back on saying, are we inhibiting ourselves in these kind of very separated content media and mediums as a journalist? So both these views, how they are doing it and how we could see some changes we could bring about.
I mean, Venkat, there's no doubt that they're extremely sharp when it comes to being able to reach newer audiences, in being able to try and target newer platforms. Every time there is a platform that emerges, generally, and my experience as a journalist tells me that the Hindu right wing is very, very quick to understand that medium, that understand that platform, and then be able to sort of establish a grip over it. That platform may or may not do well, and an example of that is Clubhouse, which came and I mean, it still remains in the shadows, but it's no longer it's a pale shadow of its former self. But even there, right? While say more progressive, more liberal people would sort of debate whether we must go on these platforms and should we do this? Is it too trivial? I've always seen that the right wing is very, very quick to sort of enter these platforms, to understand them, to understand how to game it, and then set the narratives on these platforms. Coming back to these pop stars particularly, they're also very, very sharp and shrewd in understanding which platform works for them and which doesn't. So for instance, while they might have some kind of following on Twitter, they don't necessarily, really spend a lot of their time on Twitter, because they know that that's where maybe a fraction of the proportion is. The bigger audiences are on YouTube, are on Facebook, are on WhatsApp, and that is where they focus, right? Whereas as I said, the more progressive, the more liberal side of things will be on Twitter. They will want to engage. They will want to also seek the validation of those like them. But I think in doing so, I think what is happening is that the broader left is not able to tell the stories as well. The liberal, the progressive community is not able to make stories simpler, is not able to tell its narratives and stories in a fashion that is attractive and engaging while being simple. I think there is that difference that I see between them. I was at a talk yesterday, and someone pointed to how Kavi Singh, who was one of the characters, Article 370 is abrogated in the parliament, and the next day she comes out with a song, which sort of which talks about how there is a line in the song which really says, "Ab Kashmir ki ghati mein Jai Shri Ram ke naare goonjenge," something to the effect. And it's a very quick turnaround, right? It's a day-long process for them. I mean, I've detailed in the book how they even achieved it, and I've sort of recounted those moments. But that is the kind of sort of swiftness that the ecosystem often shows, which I don't think is visible on the other side of the aisle. So somewhere there are also lessons to be learned in how they're able to tell their story so effectively and so powerfully. And in a way that convinces people and sort of ensures that the message is received very, very well.
I was just thinking and reflecting while you were saying about that, is that India as a continent, subcontinent, is not alien to the idea of using art. Some of the earliest protests against caste art through the Bhakti movement, and Karnataka itself is a land of that. When we are looking towards building a counter narrative, how do we go back and think about this? Because the world has moved on, the medium has moved on, but we are seeing art, especially music and poems and books, are playing an important role. How do we think about the counter narrative? Do we go back to some basics, or do we start really re-engaging with local narratives? What is your position, and how do we now reconstruct some sort of a hope from all the fact we did say that it's a little frightening?
I mean, I firmly believe that I think all of these have to simultaneously happen. right? Rather than having one approach, because a country as diverse and as vast as India, I think it's very difficult to then just go with one approach or one narrative and say, this is what we are going to do. I think the strength of a country like India also lies in its diversity, in the fact that we don't have one singular identity as people, right? We don't have one identity in our, I mean, you know, we might have one religious identity, but there are so many multiple layers of identities that we all carry. Somewhere the attempt is to narrow us down and pin us down to that one identity, and then tell us that everything else is subservient to that, right? Maybe it's time to remind people that there are different identities at play. Maybe it's time to remind people of the heterogeneous nature of our existence in our country, of our languages, of our cultures, of our art forms. Different regions have different languages, different traditions, different art forms, as you mentioned. I mean, you know, all of these have to then be utilized to be able to create a more coherent narrative which stands against hate and which stands against the division of people on the basis of their religions or their faiths. That is something that is at this point missing in the country. What we're seeing is the dominance of one narrative, and which is the narrative of Hindutva, which popularizes itself by, you know, very actively stoking the fear of Muslims and anger towards Muslims and Christians and the likes. But we're not seeing an effective, sort of counter message which says, hang on guys, there is nothing to fear. We're a country of coexistence, and we've been that for decades and decades and centuries. Nothing is going to change. Nothing changes in the manner that the Hindu right wing wants us to believe. And I don't think that message is being delivered effectively, Venkat.
Okay. You do mention many, because we are diverse, there are many micro strategies or micro narratives. Is that to aggregate them would also be an issue, right? Would it take longer, or do we have very less time? What would your thoughts be about how do we bring it all together? We do face a situation where the right wing has managed to create that one enemy or one or two enemies on which we are focused on, and the politics and the ideology is now coming quickly. How does one focus on so many micro narratives, and how does one bring together? I would like your view, both as a writer of this and also as a journalist. What do you think? How do we think about it?
I think there are no easy answers to this, Venkat. I think it's a complicated task, especially because we've let this narrative run amok for a while now, right? I mean, we've sort of really not been able to come up with, as I said, a coherent counter to it. As a result of which, what has happened is it has pervaded very, very different parts of the country in very deep ways. And I've seen some of that in my reporting on hate crimes. When I would see that communities which were coexisting till a few years ago, Hindus and Muslims going to each other's homes, staying in each other's homes during weddings, cooking for each other, all of that had suddenly ruptured because for a while they had been treated to this slow radicalization of Hindutva thought. So somewhere we need to be able to reach out to those exact same communities. We need to be able to go as deep as that. And which is why I say there are no easy answers. There are no easy ways of doing this. But the truth is we've spent enough time debating what to do, right? And we've not been able to come up with very concrete solutions. I mean, there are still wonderful people who are trying to be out there, spreading the message of religious harmony, of tolerance, of brotherhood, of unity in diversity. There are all of these messages. But somewhere they're not able to, reach the scale that this ecosystem has been able to reach. So the idea will be to, maybe amplify those efforts, maybe try and, see the kind of reach and kind of measures that they've adopted to be able to reach all of these people, and see if there are any lessons to learn and see if we can emulate some of that.
Yeah. Bringing people together through these art forms and through many micro strategies, one part. Both yourself as a journalist who's worked in many areas, I'm looking at two different kind of audiences. You could decide on more. One are the set of journalists who are participating. They're going through a tough time, both in terms of censorship and also migrating of the mediums. Now you're working in YouTube. The other is audience which doesn't know what to do. Right. So would you have something to say to both the journalist colleagues of yours and how they approach as we go towards this, and also the audience who is looking to find new ways to handle this. And some, I think, from my own friends and family, want to do something but do not know what to do. So would you have something to say to both of them? Or if you have any other target audience too, you could choose
No,
them.
I mean, it's a very valid question, Venkat, because I feel all of us as journalists, including myself, we have to step out of our comfort zones. We have to go deeper. We have to be able to understand the tectonic sometimes changes and shifts that are happening in the country's social fabric. And I think the inability of journalism to deliver on this front has meant that a lot of these processes have gone undetected. When I talk about the book, a lot of people and most reactions that I get from people are about how they have never heard of any of this. They've never heard of any of these people, but they've also never heard of the phenomena. They've not heard of Hindutva pop, they've not heard of Hindutva music, neither of Hindutva poetry nor of books. And my question then is, the people who are supposed to inform you, what are they doing? And by they, I mean myself, right? What have journalists like me been doing all of this while? If we are not able to understand that millions of people are attracted towards this, millions of people are patronizing these arts, and if we've had no sense of this, and if we've had no recognition or understanding of this, then we failed in our duty as journalists. So I think it's increasingly important for journalists to be, trying to understand these larger changes and trying to go deeper within the country as well to see some of these changes at work. The problem with journalism sometimes is that, all of us treat things as events. We, for instance, in hate crimes, when a man is lynched, we treat that as an event that happened. We report on the lynching. We maybe do a story or two here and there, and then we forget about it when we move on. But we don't really look at what has come before that, right? The process that led to the lynching for me as a journalist is actually a very crucial process to focus on, because that process will tell me really why the lynching happened or why a riot happened. And it's in seeking answers to those events that I really stumbled upon the subject of this book. So for me, it's been a truly rewarding and an enriching journey, and rewarding, in the sense of being able to understand my own country better. And I wish that more journalists do that. But for a larger general audience, I would also say that, be more discerning of what you're consuming, right? Understand the players, understand the beneficiaries of the culture, of the pop culture that you're consuming. Be wise and ask questions. When you're receiving those WhatsApp messages and when you're forwarding it to them, you may not know who sent it out, but you can see who's benefiting from that message, right? You can see that if there is a certain bias that is perpetuated in those messages, you can see which actor will benefit out of it. And ask yourself this question, why is this actor trying to get me to sort of, read this message and accept it? And I think the more discerning we are as audiences, the smarter we will be and the wiser we will be to propaganda. And that is the need of the hour.
Correct. That's a lovely word, discerning. Each time I think there should be a pop-up and say, have you thought through this, right? So I like that. Before we end, I would love to know what are the other projects you're working on? How can we be in touch with your project, specifically your podcast, etc.? Is there a new project you're doing, or are you going to spend more time trying to spread this book, or is there anything else in the pipeline?
So for the next few weeks, I as a journalist, I keep straddling different worlds. So I've been straddling the world of literature by writing the book, but I also do my writing for a number of publications. And I sort of, because I don't have one home for my work, I tend to use social media quite a bit to promote my work that I do, to send it out, to ensure that it reaches more people. So I am on all of the platforms by my name, by the name of Kunal Purohit. So people can find me there. But I'm working on a podcast, in fact, at this point, and I'm going to be traveling to Vidarbha for that podcast. And the podcast is based on the agrarian distress that we're seeing in the rural parts of India, especially among cotton farmers. So that it's a fascinating project that I've been associated for a few months now. And we are hoping to wrap that up, and where we are also again following the lives of 4 farmers through one harvest season, to just see, you know, the ups and downs of agriculture through their journeys as well. So I'm doing that. I'm also writing quite a bit, and then, as you said, the next couple of months are about the book. So I'm going to be traveling to different parts of the country, having conversations with people like you, meeting more and more readers and trying to tell them of what I found, and hopefully, you know, make them see what is happening in the country. So that is in the immediate future. That is what my plan looks like.
Okay, thank you so much. We wish you all the luck with all that journey. We are hoping to get you back when you do the podcast or summary of that or the next book you write. It will be great for us to reach out to the audience. And also wanted to say that eedina straddles in the world of journalism, of course, but also citizen journalists. So we are trying to bridge the gap of where individuals or community voices can voice their opinion. It need not just be journalists who are trained journalists, but can they take their opinion and bring it to common understanding so that we can have better debates and better understanding. So we're trying to, in some sense, expand the idea of journalists, and in that process, maybe find a new way to aggregate voices. So that's one of the things which we want to do. So I'm hoping that this book and this discussion will help people go and read the book in more details, also understand what's happening around, and maybe even report that through eedina or through other mediums too. Right. There are many local mediums which are coming out. It need not be just eedina. And that way we start discussing about this to counter it. And I think
that's a fantastic point, Venkat, because as we spoke, the problem with the traditional media is now that we are not able to reach all of these places. And as a result, our understanding of these phenomena is very, very limited. But a model like eedina would be able to solve that and would be able to plug that huge hole that we are currently seeing. So I do hope that people engage with the book, and I do hope that people are able to witness some of this happening around them.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
ಮತ್ತಷ್ಟು ವಿಶೇಷ ವಿಡಿಯೋಗಳನ್ನು ನೋಡಲು ಮತ್ತು ಹೊಸ ವಿಡಿಯೋಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ತಿಳಿಯಲು eedina.com ಯೂಟ್ಯೂಬ್ ಚಾನೆಲ್ ಸಬ್ಸ್ಕ್ರೈಬ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಮತ್ತು ಬೆಲ್ ಐಕಾನ್ ಕ್ಲಿಕ್ ಮಾಡಿ.